My grandfather used to say something that never made sense to me when I was a kid. He'd stare off for a moment, like he was looking through the wall instead of at it, and he'd mutter, almost to himself, "Some men don't learn anything from dying. They only learn when they're afraid." Quote. At the time, I thought it was just one of those strange old man sayings. Years later, I understood exactly what he meant. Because there was one story he only told once. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the past felt closer than the present. It wasn't a story about a battle or a heroic charge. It was quieter than that. Slower. And somehow much darker. It happened near the end of the war. When his unit was moving through a forest village that had already been torn apart by retreating German forces. Houses burned down to their chimneys. Livestock shot in the fields, doors hanging open like broken teeth. They'd found civilians hiding in cellars. Old women, kids, one man with a shattered arm. And in the middle of it all, they caught him. A German officer. Alone. Lost. Trying to slip through the trees in a stolen coat. They surrounded him in seconds. My grandfather told me he could have shot him right there. No one would have questioned it. No paperwork. No prisoners to guard. Just one more body in a war already drowning in them. But when they dragged the officer into the light, something stopped him. The man wasn't brave. He wasn't defiant. He was terrified. And that was strange, because in the officer's bag they found papers. Orders with signatures, stamps, records of interrogations, lists of names. Villagers. Partisans. People who had disappeared. The kind of officer who gave orders while other people screamed. This wasn't some scared kid forced into a uniform. This was a man who had made other people afraid for a living. My grandfather said he looked at those papers. Then at the officers shaking hands, and felt something colder than anger settle in his chest. Death would be too easy. A bullet would last half a second. But fear could last forever. So instead of killing him, he told the others they were taking the officer with them. For questioning, he said. But that wasn't really it. The first day, they tied the officer to a tree at the edge of their temporary camp. Not tight enough to hurt him. Just enough that he couldn't run. They gave him water. A piece of bread. Nothing more. And then they ignored him. Completely. No shouting. No beatings. No threats. Just silence. The officer kept trying to talk. Broken bits of Russian, then German, then pleading. Promises. Lies. He claimed he was just a clerk. Just following orders. That he had a family. No one answered. My grandfather told me that silence scared him more than any scream could have. Because the man had probably spent years interrogating prisoners, using noise, pain, questions. Now he had nothing. Just the wind in the trees and the sound of soldiers laughing by the fire. Acting like he didn't even exist. By nightfall, the officer was crying. On the second day, they moved camp. And they didn't untie him right away. They packed their gear slowly, deliberately, like they might just leave him there. He started to panic, tugging at the rope, begging. His voice cracked. He promised information, names, maps. Anything. My grandfather waited until the last second to cut him loose. Not out of mercy. Just to show him how it felt to think you'd been abandoned. How it felt to be powerless. They marched him with them, hands bound, but they didn't guard him closely. Sometimes they even walked ahead, as if daring him to run. He never did. Because now he didn't know what was worse. Escaping into the woods or staying with them. That uncertainty ate at him. On the third day, my grandfather finally spoke to him. Just one question. Do you remember their faces? Quote. The officer didn't understand. The villagers, he said. The ones on your lists. Quote. The officer looked down. That was the first time I heard my grandfather admit he lost his temper a little. Not with fists. With words. He described the burned houses. The children hiding underground. The bodies they'd found. He didn't yell. He just told the truth. Slowly. And forced the officer to listen. Every night, he said, they were afraid of you. Tonight, you're afraid of me. That's fair, isn't it? Quote. After that, he went quiet again. No more questions. No more threats. Just time. Time for the officer to sit with it. To imagine what might happen next. Every time someone reached for their rifle, he flinched. Every time footsteps came near, he stiffened. Sleep became impossible. By the fourth day, the man looked nothing like an officer. His uniform was filthy, eyes hollow, lips trembling constantly. He jumped at shadows. He stopped asking for food. He just watched them, like an animal waiting for the trap to snap shut. My grandfather said that was the moment the power truly changed hands. Not when they captured him. Not when they tied him up. But when the officer finally understood he wasn't in control of his own fate anymore. The same helplessness he had given to dozens of others was now living inside him. That was the lesson. That was the punishment. That night, my grandfather handed him over to headquarters as a prisoner of war. Alive. I remember asking him, after all that, you didn't kill him? Quote. He shook his head. No, he said. Death is quick. He would have escaped everything he'd done. Quote. He stared into his tea for a long time before adding, quieter, I wanted him to remember. I wanted him to feel small. Just once. Quote. Then he looked at me, older and sadder than I'd ever seen him. Sometimes surviving is harder than dying. And sometimes, that's the only justice you get. Quote. And the way he said it, I realized those 4 days hadn't just punished the officer. They'd stayed with my grandfather too. Because teaching someone fear leaves a mark on both sides.